Mute.
Okay, we are live on YouTube, and I will open the doors. Welcome, everybody. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. That's what you're looking for. You found the right place. We just opened the doors, so we'll let a few people in before we get started. Just letting folks in the door. If you're just signing in, welcome. Wait a couple minutes till we have folks come in, and then we'll get started. Let a couple more people in the door, and then we'll get started. Everybody, welcome. See if I can hit a magic number of 30 in just a moment, and then we'll go. Okay, we've hit our minimum magic number of 30 guests so far. Everybody else will join in when they get here, but let's get started. Good evening. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Welcome to everyone who's here. We expect Council Member Jawando shortly, but let me say a few words before we get started and before I introduce our panel. First, if you have questions or concerns, excuse me, please put them in the chat. That's where we will address them as we go. We're going to talk about the rent relief program. We're going to talk about the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. We're going to talk about code enforcement and any other issues having to do with renters that anyone would like to discuss. And when the council member gets here, he can give you some updates on what he's doing with his legislation. So first of all, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. While things are getting better here in Montgomery County, part of the pandemic that we were concerned about is how it's impacting renters. We are still seeing thousands of renters who are behind in their rent. We are seeing evictions being filed. There is no longer a rent relief or rent protection order from the governor or from the Centers for Disease Control. So renters who go to court who are behind in their rent do not have that as a defense. We are still urging people to apply for the rent relief program. I'll put the link in the chat, and it's going to be extremely important that you do so early so that your application can be processed. If you are facing eviction now, if you've received a court summons, if you've gone to court, and hopefully everyone who has gotten a summons goes to court, and you've received a judgment against you, you can expect to then receive a notice from the sheriff's office that they intend to move to evict. Now, during that time, you need to be keeping the Health and Human Services people informed of this so that they can expedite and prioritize your application. That's going to be extremely important to us and to them and to you to make sure that you can stay housed. If you're not qualified for the COVID rent relief program, there are other programs that can offer assistance, and we'll talk about a little bit about that as well. So I'm not seeing our council member just now, so I think I'll turn this over to our two guests who are with us this evening, the Deputy Director of Housing and Community Affairs, Frank Desmarais, and the Manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, Rosie McCray Moody. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have a lot of things going on. And so as Matt mentioned, we'll cover the highlights, but please ask questions in the chat. We'll try and monitor those. We'll try and answer them as they show up through the chat. So I'm going to be speaking this evening to the process and program we call COVID Rent Relief, that's managed by the Health and Human Services Division, supported by all of the county. This is the up to $12,000 of rent assistance for past due rent arrears, and can pay some months of forward rent, and also cover the other types of support you can get if you're facing difficulty paying rent and working with the landlord. So, just to start with the fundamentals, the key thing to understand about the county program is that it still is open. It's been open since April. It's an ongoing, there's no cutoff at this point. We have money, federal dollars that we're still working with. So there is funding available for those who've experienced an income loss due to COVID and are in arrears on at least $1,000 of rent. And there is an income threshold. There's a table at the website. I'm posting that in the chat right now. If you go to the county's website.
You're on mute, Frank.
The whole time, I'm sorry. Thank you, Rosie.
Just for a moment, not the whole time.
Okay, I'm sorry, something happened. I think when I was trying to hit the chat update. So, but the key thing is for everyone on this call, whether you personally are experiencing these difficulties or you know someone, but to share as broadly as you can in your community that this funding is available. The details are at the website posted, but it is montgomerycountymd.gov. And then you just put in a search for rent relief or COVID rent relief. It'll take you to the main page. You'll see the income eligibility, other eligibility, and right there, there's a tab to begin your application. We are receiving many hundreds of applications each week, but we know that we're still not reaching many hundreds who are eligible, and the county does have funds available. The federal government has made these funds available across the country. They put requirements on it that we have to maintain. One of the conditions they put was that we needed to have a certain amount of the money committed by September 30, which is tomorrow, and Montgomery County has met that standard. So we are not at risk of any reduction in our funding available, and we could be eligible for some future funding. But we have right now over $59 million that's been awarded. We have applications in process that we can support with our funding available, and we are accepting new applications, and we believe that we will be able to fund all of the eligible applications that we have in and still have available funds.
Frank, Frank, if I could just interrupt you,
right.
On some good news, the meeting the 65% and is still having funds available. We will continue with those important pieces of information, but I know Councilmember Jawando is stopping by. He's on his way to a council meeting shortly after this. So it is our honor and pleasure, as always, to have Councilmember Will Jawando with us. He's going to give us some updates on the legislation that is pending having to do with the emergency rent stabilization bill. Councilmember Jawando, thanks for stopping by. We know you've been extremely busy.
You all, oh, there you go.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you all, and sorry to be a couple minutes behind and to have to leave early, but really appreciate that the Renters Alliance always is doing these and keeping people up to date on what's going on. So to continue, I think there is some modified good news, and at least interim. We're not across the finish line yet, but we did take a good step last week and passed the 3021, the expedited bill that would extend the emergency rent stabilization that we put in place last year with the bill I introduced. There was one major amendment regarding the late fees. If you remember, this bill, unlike the previous bill, called for the suspension of late fees for the next year, as well as keeping the rent stabilization in place through August of next year. So we also put that in this bill. And the change in committee was that that if you wanted to have your late fees waived, you have to attest that you've been had material income, you've had income loss due to COVID, and that the landlord will have to send out a notice to every tenant to give them the opportunity to make that attestation. And so that is a means testing of sorts, but I think where we ended up, it's not as high a hurdle as it could have been. And so all you'd have to do is respond to that notice. And if you find out later and you missed it, or you get it sometime during the year, and then you respond in with that attestation, you should be either refunded late fees that you paid, or they should still be waived. So that's an amendment that passed. And so the bill passed out of committee 2-1 with Councilmember Reamer and I voting for it. Councilmember Friedson voted against it, which means we're still not done. It's an expedited bill, which means we need 6 votes of 9 because it'll go into effect right away. And so we have 2 right now, and there's 6 more council members that haven't voted on it yet. I've been talking with a lot of my colleagues, and I know the Renters Alliance and other organizations have been working really hard to let council members know how important this is as a part of the overall pie. Really happy. I heard Mr. Desmarais talking about the fact that we've reached that 65% threshold and lead the state in that category as far as not having money clawed back, which is great. And we continue to get money out the door for people who need aid. But remember, we're in a climate where the governor's eviction moratorium and state of emergency have ended. The CDC eviction moratorium was thrown out by the Supreme Court. So we really don't have a lot of protection. I know there are some folks that are going to be organizing to continue to urge the governor to put those back in place later this week. And I'm assuming Matt will talk about that, or the Renters Alliance will be a part of those efforts in Annapolis. But we need to have an all hands on deck approach. And what we can do at the county level, in addition to getting this money out quickly and encouraging other people to sign up for rental assistance, is to pass Bill 3021 that would keep the stabilization in place for another year. The last thing we need to do is have the accrual of late fees and rents to go up at any amount, which could happen come November if we don't pass this bill. So it's coming to a full vote, I believe, next week, not this, is that right? I think it's October 5th.
It's the 5th, yeah, Tuesday.
Yeah, October 5th coming up. And so if you haven't contacted folks, please do. And we're hoping that there's no other amendments. I know there might be some pending, but I really want to make sure that we do not change the stabilization and means tested, because we know that people already, because 2/3 of people who are who are facing eviction that we get from the sheriffs, you've heard this number, maybe 2/3 have not applied for rental assistance, which means there's a lot of people out there that don't know what protection and rights that they have. And so we do not want to change this from a thing that applies to everyone to something where you have to navigate and jump through a lot of hoops, because that means that people will not get the relief. And so that's a real important part. And so I'm hoping that we can protect it from those weakening amendments. But that's another thing to reach out to council members about. So I think that's all I have on that. And just wanted to thank you all for your efforts. And I'll be in Annapolis. I don't know if you've talked about this already, Matt, but I'm going to join CASA and other groups. My understanding is that there's going to be some folks doing a sleep in Annapolis on Friday night, so to, try to convince the governor to put relief and an eviction moratorium back in place. So I'll be there Friday evening for a time. And we really have to do everything we can to make sure folks stay stable in their homes. So that's it for me for now.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Jawando. I'm actually working with tenants Friday night, but we're a co-founder of Renters United Maryland, as you know, and they will be there, and we will be there in spirit. Hope it works. We'll see. We'll get the governor's attention. A couple things. We have heard some pushback that people at wealthier apartment buildings shouldn't get a stabilized apartment because landlords have to pay taxes, and property taxes are going up. What's your thought about the relationship of renters paying rent and landlords paying taxes?
Right. Well, we had a debate about this the other day or yesterday with relation to the business improvement district. But look, as you well know, renters do pay taxes because the costs are passed on in the form of rent going up. And we see that in the commercial sector. We certainly see it in the residential. And so that's not one, and we haven't raised property taxes. That's another thing, we're just going to be able to collect the taxes that should be owed. But that's that aside, that is passed on. And when you don't have any control on where rents can go, it's even more passed on, and profits can be squeaked out. And what I would say about the thing we've learned about this pandemic, and we continue to learn, is that it has impacted many people in many ways. And I think in a county as large as ours, 1 million people, 1,052,000 is the number that we got in the census, which is, there's always an undercount, so we're bigger than that. But over 1 million people, 1/3 of our county renting, you can't have that many people renting and know everyone's situation. And I think that, a lot of people lost hours, spouse lost a job, their health concerns. I often remind people, as you know, and the reason I introduced Bill 5220 to stabilize rents near transit, where it's most expensive, is that if a rent goes up 10%, our Department of Housing, Mr. Demarais, Rosie, considers that constructive eviction, the same as eviction. If your rent goes up from $1,000 to $1,100 in 1 year, that's considered constructive eviction, because we already know many people, disproportionately Black, Latino residents, are rent burdened, 30, 40, 50% of their income on rent. And so the idea that you should just let anyone's rent go up in any amount, we'll have that battle another day. But particularly as we come out of COVID, I think having a broad-based, because we have a large renter population, allowing a modest increase in a broad-based way is a better way to make sure that landlords can take care of upgrades in their facilities and the like, and still turn a profit. Like you always say, we're not against profit. We just want quality, stable, affordable housing.
Landlord tenant considers 10% excessive. And we would bother the landlord about it. We would go after him. We would tell him it was excessive. See if he could break it up, do, 3%, break it up over 3 years or 2 years. It's because it is excessive, because nobody gets a 10% increase in pay.
Yeah, and people on Social Security don't get much more than a 1% increase.
So
Uh,
because there's no rent control in the county, it's like we can, we can be a pain about it, but ultimately we can't force them to take it back.
mhm.
Now we can because of the emergency legislation, but after it's gone, all we can do is just kind of be a pain about it.
Well,
And
I
a
just
lot of
wanna-
them break it up. We say, look, this is excessive. We're going to send it to the committee. It is excessive. And they'll break it up for 2 and raise it over 2 years or 3 years. So it's not so,
Yeah.
Well, I want to reinforce something that the council member was alluding to. First of all, Renters Alliance thinks anything over the county's voluntary rent increase guidelines begins to be excessive. And obviously we've seen a whole lot of very excessive rents. People getting 5, 10, 20 and higher % rent increases makes their housing unstable over in the short run and the long run. But just to define rent again, I don't know, I met too many landlords who are selling their second house in order to pay property taxes. They are using rent to cover their expenses, their overhead, the maintenance, their staff, and their profit. That profit is built into rent when they let the home in the first place. If they haven't thought that one through, they shouldn't be in the landlord business. And the voluntary rent increase guidelines, which the council member is making required, are supposed to take into account the rising general overhead of the landlord business. Now, if the voluntary rent increase guidelines are not fair, then that's an issue for the council to consider as to whether or not overhead of the landlord industry, like heating and utilities and maintenance costs, are exceeding that. That's a fair question. The Renters Alliance doesn't believe the landlords are in the charity business, but we do know that renters pay rent to cover the expenses of landlords and make them a profit. And so I agree with everything the council member has said. The Renters Alliance stands behind this bill, as testified, and 2 of our board members testified for it. And we believe that it is in the best interest of the county. And they may not like it, but we think it's in the best interest of landlords too, to have a stable renter population, which is now, council member, approaching 36, 37% of county residents. So
There you go.
any last
No
words,
longer.
council member?
No, I'll just say thank you for making those points, and I'll adjust you're right. It is 36, 37. It's not 30, it's 33 for a long time. So we're in rising, and just underscores why this is so important. So thank you to all you do. Thank you to Mr. Demaray and Ms. McCray Moody for all your work. And I'll see you all soon. Hopefully I'll be back in a couple of weeks, or next time we'll be reporting that this is increased. This has been passed and not, we still have the protection. And just to point out, Halima Ahmed, who I know in the chat here, good to see you, Halima, is saying a 15% increase in our apartment building per our new renewal terms. That is not allowed. So you should reach out
file a complaint.
Yeah, file a
Absolutely.
complaint with Miss Moody Mills with DHCA.
Right.
So, all right. And can you, Rosie, can you put in the chat? I know this group knows, but I want to save the link where you go if you want to file a complaint and what you need to, is there wherever the link is, or if you just, what the way you should do that is.
Okay.
We will cover it.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, council member, for coming.
Take care.
So back to the Deputy Director of Housing and to Ms. Rosie McCray Moody. Frank, when you left off, you were telling us the good news that the county will not lose any money to the federal government because it has managed to hit the 65% requirement before September 30th. That's good news. Still more work to do, still more aid to get out the door, but at least that hurdle has been crossed or jumped over, as the metaphor might go, and that you also were talking about outreach. So please carry on, Frank.
Okay, and I'll touch on one of the topics that's in the chat, but it's the other key message here is that many on this call and others across the county have applied. We have many thousands who have applied who have not received their award yet. The fundamental is if you have not been denied, and when you make application, you're given an account number, a case number, you process through what they call the portal, the application system. You can track any updates or changes to the status of your application. If your application is not denied, you are in process and you will be receiving funding. It's a process that's taking longer than we'd hoped, but we are moving a lot of cases forward. So the key here is to be able to share with your landlord that you are in process, you have not been denied. Even when you get a case manager assigned, the process at that point is, formalizing, finalizing. You may get some follow-up questions. You need to be responsive to any phone calls that are coming into the phone number you entered. So the responsiveness helps. The biggest challenge is that we have to meet certain document requirements established by the U.S. Treasury, by the federal funding. And so we have to complete that before we can finally approve your case. But the updates that are available online in that portal. The case managers and calling the county is really not going to give you a better update on your status than you can see. It can be very, very frustrating. It can be many months of seeing no activity, but the cases are moving forward. And we understand this, and we're doing the best we can with the large staff that we put on board. But the large number of cases we're processing and the specific requirements have us at the point we're at. The key here, though, when you hear the 65% Matt just mentioned, which was the threshold, that's for the first batch of funding from the federal government. We have additional batch coming. So it's not that 65% of our total funds are committed, but of the money that was required to be committed by the 30th September. So again, funding is available, encouraging folks to spread the word and encouraging you to stay focused on your status in the reports online. So the other key thing is if you receive a court summons, if you receive a judgment against you in court, and you are facing imminent loss of housing, the important thing is the county does have support while you're waiting for COVID rent relief for rent arrears. If you are facing the loss of your housing, the key is to call 311 to ask about housing stabilization services, or just to explain that you've received an imminent notice of eviction. If you get the final notice posted on your door, the red and white, to connect with the county, with the Health and Human Services housing support. In some cases, people who have applied for assistance for rent arrearage, we can accelerate some of their processing if they have a eviction action. So we're hoping that everyone that receives any final notices is in touch with the county, and we can support them with staying in their home or transitioning as appropriate, but to avoid the risk of being displaced is the number one. But if you get any court action, a notice that you're going to be summoned to court, you're going to have a court date. The county has support for that. The Health and Human Services COVID rent relief will accelerate or prioritize your case to make sure that we do what we can to avoid an eviction action. But also there are legal resources. The county has supported, and there are attorneys, free legal assistance available. The phone numbers are at the county's website. We'll put this in the chat again. It's montgomerycountymd.gov. And if you put in /renters, or you just put in search for renters, you should be able to find the website with the support resources, which include legal assistance, Maryland Legal Aid, Homeless Persons Representation Project, which is not just for homeless, but it's general legal assistance. And there's a free court-based help center that provides free legal advice, telephone, or if you show up in court, they actually have an attorney on site to help you understand your rights. So the fundamentals of support are to connect with the county. Renters Alliance is one of the service providers, together with Housing Initiative Partnership, Latino Economic Development Corp, and CASA, who can help you navigate, understand your rights, prepare for your court date, but there are lawyers that can work with you. So financial assistance through the COVID rent relief and the emergency assistance with housing stabilization and then preparation services and help in working with your rights and how you can take advantage of all these resources. And they can connect you with other resources. They can connect you with food, utility assistance. They can refer you. And so the important thing that we're stressing is that you're not alone. There are resources available, and our challenge is to communicate and get that out to as many people as we can. We ask your assistance in doing that. We're going to have additional information here from Department of Housing Community Services, Housing Community Affairs with Rosie McCray Moody, who will identify your process for connecting with the county and working with our landlord and tenant support resources. So, Rosie, if you can take over.
Oh, I was trying to, my mouse is not trying to help me today. I was trying to put in,
I got Marilyn Nicolay in there for you.
contact the office.
Okay, I'll get it up for you, Rosie. Go ahead.
Okay, so, what were we gonna talk about? The Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs cannot help you with your rent relief. Don't call us and ask us where you are in the queue or whatever, because we don't know. We can refer you back to HHS, but we can't look it up for you. We honestly don't know. We do not have access to that information. We can explain the eviction process to you and tell you that your landlord cannot put you out without a court order. So if they threaten you and say, if you don't pay by Sunday, Monday, we're gonna put your things out, that's not true. Please call landlord tenant if that happens. It's just not true. It's illegal. They cannot do that. They have to take you to court. They have to get an order. They have to get a writ, and the sheriff has to be present. And until all that happens, they cannot put you out. They can give you nasty notes, but they cannot put you out. Effective October 1st, the landlord cannot sue you unless he gives you a 10-day notice, a 10-day warning that if you don't pay, he's going to take you to court and sue you for failure to pay rent. It's called a notice of intent to file summary ejectment, and it's a form from the court. But if they do not give you that first, they cannot sue you for failure to pay rent, because they have to file that form along with the notice, along with the failure to pay rent form, and they have to attest to the fact that you were given this notice and that you did receive it. So if you don't get that 10-day notice, they can't sue you. So remember that. It's called a notice of intent to file summary ejectment. What else? Right now, the landlord cannot raise your rent above the voluntary guideline until November the 15th. If the bill that Mr. Jawando was talking about passes, they can't raise it above the voluntary guideline until next year. But we won't know that until next week.
And when does that expire if it doesn't change, Rosie?
If it does not change, effective November 15th, the landlord can raise your rent above the voluntary rent guideline. But as of November 15th, he would still have to give you a 90-day notice of that increase. So honestly, it wouldn't kick in until December, January, March 1st.
So wait a second. If so, 90 days prospective for sure. But if it's on November 16th, the day after that deadline, could that 90 days prospective be of any rent beyond the increased guidelines?
If the bill doesn't pass, yes.
Okay, so that's the distinction. So it's not that you have 90 days more, it's that you just have a 90-day notice
If they raise,
the 15th.
and if they've already raised your rent this year, because rent can only be raised once every 12 months. If your rent has already been raised this year, they cannot raise it again until next year.
So if you receive a rent increase notice or a renewal notice between now and November 15th, It cannot
Cannot
contain
exceed the
an
voluntary.
increase above 1.4%. That's what the voluntary rent increase guideline is for this year since last February. And by the way, you are also entitled to have a 2-year lease offer. And so if you receive a renewal notice, it should include a 2-year lease offer, and the second year cannot be above 1.4% either.
No,
So if you're planning to
not
stay a
during this
while,
period, unless
take the
the
2
law
years.
changes. If
Right.
the law changes, then it'll stay like it is for a while.
Mhm.
So we basically at the next meeting, we'll know.
And I put my email in the chat at info@rentersalliance.org. If you've received a renewal notice in the last year that is above, since February, that is above 1.4%, please let us know. We will work with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to deal with that. If it has happened, as we've seen in other places, the landlord will owe you the amount that you've paid above the 1.4%, either probably as a rent credit, and we'll have to provide you with a new renewal notice that is 90 days prospective at 1.4%. That includes a 2-year lease offer. So be on top of that. These laws are in place for a reason. Some of these laws were laws that the Renters Alliance worked very hard with county officials to put in place. So we want to see them exercised. What else, Rosie?
Okay, I see a note in the chat saying, does the law about rent increases include MPDUs? Yes, it does, but I think MPDUs yeah, it does include MPDUs. But MPDUs have their own rules, but I know that the voluntary guideline does count in MPDUs.
If there's any rule to it, it would be that they're stabilized somehow, or at least below area median income, but their increases can't be above 1.4%. I should also note that those renters who receive or must receive annual certification in order to qualify for the apartment that they're in will not be offered a 2-year lease. Those are exempted from the 2-year lease offer. Is that right, Rosie?
Say it again.
Those who are in, who have to provide annual financial certification at their income level.
Yeah, they
because of
are
that,
exempted from the 2-year lease
from the 2-year lease.
but while they may be exempted from the 2-year lease, they still need to get a written statement from the landlord explaining that. Because you either have to be offered the 2-year lease or be given a written explanation as to why you are not being offered a 2-year lease. So the landlord needs to give you a note every time you renew your lease saying, because you participate in the tax credit program or because you are an HOC tenant, we can only renew your rent annually based on your qualification to continue in the program.
Well, that's kind of interesting because would you consider that notice a requirement the same way as the renewal notice requirements have to be put in place?
It is a requirement. It's in the law. You're supposed to be given, it says you have to be offered a 2-year lease, or one of the choices is that your landlord gave you a written explanation as to why you were not offered a 2-year lease.
So if they did not offer you that, is the renewal notice defective?
It is.
And so if you didn't get that, what is the cure for that?
They just have to give you the written notice. They can
That's the
they
cure?
may have to reissue the notice, but they do have to give you that written explanation. Because if you're in the program and you have to qualify every year, that their reason for not offering you the 2-year lease stands. That's fine. But they still have to give you that written notice and reissue that notice, your 90-day notice.
But if your renewal notice is defective, then do they have to start from a properly formatted and renewal notice with the explanation 90 days prospective?
Yes, they should.
Okay. Well, you don't sound that certain, but
No, they should.
we will use it.
Sometimes we don't, sometimes we don't require. If you raise it as an issue, a lot of people don't raise it as an issue because they know.
Well, now they will.
So
if we have anything to do with it,
they know
will.
they can't get a 2-year lease, so they don't say anything. But you do have that right to get it in writing,
Mm-hmm.
and you should.
Mm-hmm.
Just for you, that you should have it in writing.
Mhm. Rosie or Frank Desmarais, can you give us some updates on what's going on with code enforcement? And if you would also remind us the difference between the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs and what code enforcement does.
Well, I'll touch on the fundamentals of code enforcement, housing code enforcement, which is that we have a set of requirements. We actually have a very user-friendly guidebook online. I'll post a link to that, that explains what elements of the housing code are in fairly readable terms. But the fundamentals are safety and health-related elements of your housing. If you have items that are part of your lease agreement, things that you've agreed that you should have that are not working, it can include building elements, can include elements inside your unit, your appliances. If you have water, mold, any health-related elements, if you have vermin, rodents, etc. And the first thing is always to contact your property management, work with them. Their responsibilities to address. If you have items that your property management, your landlord is not addressing, you contact the county. And I believe Matt put a link into the chat, but you can call 311, the general information line. You can ask for code enforcement and you can be connected and someone will respond to you. They'll review the issue with you. They'll work to get the landlord to address the issue. And they will come out and inspect and to determine the nature of the issue. So during the COVID period, we did step back our regular scheduled inspections. We have a regime of inspecting buildings on a regular basis, and those with significant code violation history are inspected on a more regular basis and a higher percentage, some of them annually. We were not doing those types of inspections during the COVID health emergency. We've re-engaged and are working through that list of inspections, but we are responding to every complaint. And you file the complaint, you get a service request number. You can stay in touch with us about that, but we will have a process where the code inspector will be in touch with you and work with you to document the issue and then to work with getting the issue remedied. And we do have enforcement authority when it comes to requiring certain items to be addressed. We don't cover everything that you might have a concern about, and they'll explain that. There are things that are required, and then there are other elements of that you may have concerns about people in your building. The question came up earlier on face coverings. The county does have a requirement that all individuals over the age of 2 wear a face covering in all indoor spaces that are accessible to those persons outside your household. Very difficult enforcement. It's information that we've shared with all the landlords. They are aware of it. It's very difficult for anyone to enforce, but it is something to keep reminding your property manager, landlord of, as well as to work with them on other concerns around COVID safety. We still have a requirement for achieving the cleaning standards that are recommended by the CDC. And this information is available. There's a poster that's in all multifamily buildings, but available from us. And I'll let Rosie describe a little bit more of the complaint process and the process of working with the county on both the code response and on the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs.
Okay, I saw there's a question in the chat saying, I've called my landlord for mold and it takes him 4 to 6 weeks to respond. If you call for a repair and it takes more than a few days for the landlord to come, call 311 and ask to speak to code enforcement. And code enforcement can then send an inspector out to check on it and order that the landlord make the repair, which will make it move a little faster. That's the code. So if it's maintenance that you need done and it's not being done, call 311 and ask for code enforcement. If you feel your rights as a tenant have been violated in some way, you being charged a fee that you shouldn't pay, or you didn't get your security deposit back, or you didn't get a proper notice of rent increase, call 311 and ask to speak to someone in landlord tenant. And we will call you back. We call people back generally on the same day, but we will call you back. We always try at least 3 times to contact everyone.
Rosie, can you address a couple other questions that came in? One is, does the rent increase cap cover people on month-to-month leases? What's the difference? What are the
Absolutely.
county laws?
Being month to month has absolutely nothing to do with it. Because the cap is in place, there is no such thing as a month to month premium. They can't hit you and say, well, if you renew, you get 1.4, but if you go month to month, you have to pay more. No, you don't. 1.4 for everybody, period.
And you can only receive a rent increase once
every 12 months.
period, whether you have an annual lease, a 2-year lease, or your month to month. Also, I think people should know that if you're on an annual lease or a 2-year lease, and your landlord does not renew that lease, and does not give you a notice to vacate, which is a possibility, that you go automatically onto month to month with the same provisions that are in your lease. So it's not like you lose your lease stays the same. And if they don't give you that renewal notice, then your rent cannot go up at all. So
well, they have to give you notice of it.
They have to give you a notice. If they don't give you the notice, it's got to stay where it was. You go automatically month to month. I saw another question in there about mold increases. Mold is a increasing problem nationally. As everybody knows, if you're not, God forbid, in the fire zone of California, you're in the rain zone of someplace else, and moisture is increasing. Rosie or Frank, can either of you address this common problem?
I can tell you this. It is a common problem. And let me say that there's mold everywhere. So there's no way to have a place that's absolutely mold free. However, if you have excessive mold, you should report it and the landlord should eliminate it. Eliminate the source of it. So if they have a leak or whatever's causing it, they need to eliminate it. The problem with mold is there is no mold standard. There's no local mold standard. There's no state mold standard. There's no federal mold standard. So it's no way to say, this is too much mold and it's going to make me sick, or this mold level is low and nothing's going to happen to you, because no standard exists. Some people are just sensitive to mold, so even if it's just a little bit, it may make them sick. They may have respiratory issues. They may have asthma or some other condition that mold aggravates. So by all means, call 311, have code enforcement come out and have the landlord eliminate that mold. But in terms of trying to go after the landlord because the level is high, we really can't do anything about it because there's no standard. So it's nothing for us to hang our hats on.
Well, there is an enforcement standard that is
that we can say it has to be eliminated, but we can't say it has to be eliminated and the level is 2,000, and which is dangerous because we just don't know that.
Understood. But if you see mold on your walls, on the surface of your convectors,
call 311
then
for code enforcement.
Code will come and they will require them to clean it up, and hopefully will require them to get to the source of it, especially if there's leaky pipes. Another question came in, Rosie, because I know it comes up from time to time. If you have a verbal lease and you don't have a written lease, what laws protect you in those circumstances? I imagine it's the same thing.
The laws are the same. The problem with a verbal lease is the terms of the lease are contingent upon both of you agreeing that those are the terms of the lease. So 2 years ago when we met and we decided the rent was $1,000 and you'd pay all the utilities, and now 2 years later I lost my job and I haven't paid you for about 3-4 months. You want your utilities paid. Now the terms have changed, but since there's nothing in writing, it's he said, she said. So I would never recommend you having a verbal lease. It's like paying in cash. It's like throwing money in the trash. Get everything in writing. That's our advice. Get everything in writing.
Yeah, we agree with that wholeheartedly. And there is a model lease that the county offers on its website, which we would urge you to use, because the model lease will ensure that what provisions are in there are legal. We've seen leases with all kinds of provisions that are not legal in Montgomery County, much less the state of Maryland. We had a senior building that was requiring the seniors to clean their gutters and mow the lawn. Since they had no gutters or any lawn to mow, it was kind of didn't really work. So there are provisions in leases that are standard, but they must be legal or they're not enforceable. So if you don't have a written lease, we urge you to contact the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, go on the website, try to persuade your landlord to give you a written lease, and preferably one that is already approved of by the county.
Yeah. And just, call us. Because even if we're not the place for you to go, we will refer you to code. And you may have both things. Sometimes you have a landlord-tenant complaint and a code enforcement complaint. And we'll take the landlord-tenant complaint and send a copy over to code as a follow-up. And so we'll work them both together. So call. Always call. It's not going to hurt you. Chris Perry's hand is up.
We hear you, Chris. Talk. Oh, I thought we could hear you. Well,
Maybe
it could be that he's just scratching his head. Hang on. I am going to put the link to the model lease page of the county in the chat.
And we should be updating that very soon.
There you go. Other concerns. Frank, do we have any numbers on the evictions that we're seeing?
The process, I'll just clarify, the process for eviction is if you go through court and you receive a judgment, and if you do not show up, you will get a summary judgment. It will be automatic. If you do show up and present your case, you can still get a judgment. Once the landlord receives a judgment against you for the unpaid rent, they can request that the court issue what's called a writ for possession of the property. Many landlords do not automatically ask for that writ, but once that is issued, the sheriff's department will provide a notice. They call it a final notice. It's printed red and white. It's posted on the door. You'll get things in the mail. And from the day of that notice, the most current timeline that we have is 6 to 7 weeks before the sheriff will have scheduled an eviction date. So I'm reviewing this because it's important to know, and it was mentioned earlier, that you cannot be evicted without court action and without the sheriff enforcing that. The number of writs that are being issued on a weekly basis that we're getting reports from the sheriff's department are less than 20 a week and less than 100 in the last 5 weeks total. There's a very large backlog that courts are working with. So that does not mean that there's only that many people facing the potential for eviction action. But the ones that they're getting to and issuing and scheduling dates for are approximately that would be out about 6 or 8 weeks from the issuance in August and through September. So we expect that we can reach most of those individuals if they're still in their home, in their unit. We can offer the support because we get, at the time the eviction notice is issued, scheduled, the court is at that point willing and able to share with the county, with our support organizations and our legal resources, information about who has received that notice, and we will try and reach them. But for anyone on the call here that's had a court action against them, until you receive that notice, you don't have an eviction date set. Your landlord has not asked for that at that point. you have time to work with them and to work with the rent relief process to receive the back rent, to work with your landlord to get paid. They will not get paid if you leave. So, to work with your landlord, if they want to get back rent paid and you can get some forward month's rent to help you remain in your property, they need to work with you, work with that process. And we know most lenders that are willing and currently working with that process, but they're still pushing to try and have action. So you can get legal assistance to help you understand the process. You can get support from Renters Alliance and the other support organizations for you to understand the process and work with your landlord. And you can, as soon as you receive any of those notices, update your COVID rent relief application status. If you have a case manager, to go through what we call the portal, the electronic system, to update them for acceleration and prioritization. But there are evictions occurring. There are people who are not responding. There are many people who don't know about the rent relief. And so we're trying every channel we can think of, and we can push the information out. But again, we ask everyone to help us with their networks, with your congregations, faith communities, social organizations. We're looking to try and get that word out to folks.
Thanks, Frank. I'm going to go to the Q&A questions. We would prefer you all put your questions in the chat because we don't always pay attention to the Q&A, but there's some important questions in here. This one comes up. I'm going to go in reverse order because I love this comes up from time to time, and I've had to deal with it myself personally. Can a landlord charge you fines? Our landlord once said, if you put plants on the convector when they're coming up to change the thing, they're going to charge you $50 a plant. Somebody else says that if they find garbage in the hallway, they're going to charge you $100, or everybody on that floor is going to get charged $100. Can landlords charge fines, Rosie?
Not really. We consider it an illegal rent increase. Now, when you sign your lease, if it says if we have to come and rekey your lock because you lost the key, or we have to replace your key, we're going to charge you $25. You agree to that, but they can't fine you because you have a plan on the convector and stuff. Call landlord tenant, because it's a lot of new landlords in the county and they try to get you for everything. And if anybody on this call is paying valet trash without their consent, if they didn't sign something that said they wanted to pay for valet trash service, please call the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. That's illegal. If you live in an apartment building, trash collection is free. The landlord cannot charge you for that.
And no, most of you may not have landlords. You may have property managers. So if the landlord doesn't know what he or she is doing, it's a good chance that the property management doesn't either. So many of them are new, many of them turn over all the time. But the bottom line is, as Rosie was alluding to, there is some justification for a charge. If the landlord has to do something that costs the landlord money, for example, if they don't have 24-hour concierge and you lock yourself out of your apartment building, and the only way to get in, and again, if they put it in the lease or have a process for this, they can say, hey, look, we're not waking up our maintenance man without agreeing to pay him 2 hours. And 2 hours of that maintenance man's time is $75. So that may be what it costs to get you in your apartment. On the other hand, in my building, for example, we have 24-hour concierge. If I lock myself out, and I've done it a few times over the last 20 years, I go down, they hand me the key, I come up with it. That doesn't cost them anything. There's no charge to the landlord. Likewise, late fees. You can't be charged more than 5% of rent. Is that correct, Rosie?
That's absolutely correct.
And not
And
until
you
after
can't be charged till after the 10th.
After the 10th of the month. So if you have any issue with the landlord arbitrarily charging you or threatening to fine you, please contact. We love to hear these stories because we like to squash them pretty fast. And of course, we love to tell landlord tenant because they like to deal with easy stuff too. So let us know. What else do we have here? Are there funds with the utilities to cover monies owed? In the rent relief program,
Yes.
I believe that there are utility funds also available. Frank, is that right?
There's special programs for utility funds Most of the money comes through a state program. It's not a separate component within the COVID rent relief, but the HHS contacts and the 311, and Rosie, you can speak to this better, but to contact 311 about connecting with the appropriate resources, appropriate staff in the county that can help you with applying for utility assistance. It's also available at the Montgomery County website if you search for utility assistance. But Rosie, what's the best step?
If you are getting ready to get a utility cut off, call 311, ask to speak to HHS rent stabilization. And a lot of times for like a utility, they have some money and then they contact the community partners, MUST, community ministries, all the health organizations, Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, and try to put together monies to stop the cutoff of your utilities. So there is help for you. Start with Health and Human Services.
On the issue of how many applications have been processed for the rent relief program, Frank, you're going to have to back me up on what I think I know on this. I believe that it's about 40% of the applications that have come in. Frank, if there's a more accurate number, let me know. I also know that the applications are not on the first come, first served basis. We, with Renters Alliance, would like that to be the case, but they are working at capacity, and with this capacity strategy, they are prioritizing those who are facing imminent eviction. So that's the way the application process is rolling. Frank, what other information do we have about how many applications in, what percentage out the door, and process?
Okay, so we have completed and paid out on about 3,000 applications. We have unique applications of about 8,000 that were received. As Matt mentioned, there's a significant number that have been processed that are in process of being completed. The commitments have been communicated for at least 65% of those of the dollars we need to commit, which is going to be about 4,500 applications will have been dollars committed to them. But the important thing, everyone's waiting for their application. Where they, people who applied in April and May are still waiting. The federal requirements, as much as we may have different opinions on it, the federal requirements mandated prioritization of certain income levels, certain employment statuses, and certain very low income or targeted geographic areas defined by the program. So, but all of the prioritizations have been addressed. We've also been prioritizing those who have been noticed of evictions pending or court actions, and those have been processed. So the answer is that most of the applications have been deemed at this point. They've been sorted and looked at for duplicates. That we believe that if you have not received a denial at this point, even if your application has been in for 2 months or 3 months, if you have not received a denial, right now we believe that just about all of those applications will be fully documented, will be processed, and will be paid up to their eligible amounts. Now, what we can't tell you at the moment is what has been determined specifically to be your eligible amount, to know the dollar amount, but the opportunity to share with your landlord the information that your application remains active is an indication that your application will be processed, you'll be receiving funding, and you can track that at the application portal. And again, we have put in the chat, and the answer has consistently been that the case managers and the processing staff cannot give more information than just that the application is active or denied. Case manager working with you may have some specific questions, maybe trying to reach you or have things in process, but they really are not in a position to give any more detailed update than it is in process. And I'll just say, we understand how frustrating and difficult this is. and everyone is working extremely hard with as much focus as possible, and we will get through the applications.
And I've been asked to remind you, if you've applied, watch your phone, watch your emails, and if somebody contacts you or you get a call, answer that call. Sometimes your application may get kicked out because they were trying to reach you and they couldn't. You didn't answer your email, you didn't answer the phone, and they didn't know they can't just hold your application open and keep calling you because there's too many people in the queue. So please answer your calls, answer your emails, help them help you. Don't get kicked out because you didn't answer the phone.
And the Renters Alliance is, we're an independent nonprofit that advocates for renters. If you have issues with this process, we don't always agree. We believe that there should be more information. We understand the reasons why there are not, but we are pushing and advocating for improvements wherever that's possible. So let us know what kinds of problems you're running into. We'll see if we can help or add it to our dialogue with the county to see where improvements can be made. I saw a question about does the application process require an ID, a government issued ID? Frank or Rosie, do either of you know the answer to that?
I don't think so, but
No, the answer is no, but it's also important to note it does not have any requirements or conditions on immigration status, citizenship status. It's important to be able to document who the applicant is. So the first request is for photo ID. And then the process will work with what available documents the applicant has. And they have to be satisfied that they are processing and working with the tenant who is on the application. There's also a question about how the assistance is paid, to the landlord. The landlord cannot apply on behalf of a tenant without tenant involvement. Landlords can support, they can help the tenant upload documents, they can help coordinate a lot of activities, but all applications have to be by the tenant and involving the tenant and then confirmed with the tenant. But they can get assistance from Renters Alliance, from their landlord in completing the application, uploading documents. Landlords have a separate access to the application to upload the rent ledger or any other information about the property that's needed. But the landlord cannot apply without your involvement.
But the landlord
will be credited to your account.
The landlord does need to inform you that they have received the funds on your behalf. Is that right?
The landlord needs to let you know that your account has been paid to the extent that it's paid.
Right.
And they also agree to certain conditions about not filing action against you for the time period in which they've received funds, because the awards in most cases are including forward month's rent, not just back months.
Right. So if there's any confusion about that, let us know as well. You have the right, I believe, Rosie or Frank, if you're not sure, the landlord should have to tell you. And if they won't tell you or they can't get their ledger together, then I would first call or contact your caseworker at Health and Human Services and confirm that the check has been issued, when it's been issued, if it's been cashed. And if there's a problem with getting information from the landlord for some reason, then I would imagine, Rosie, would that be appropriate for you?
Now, we will call the landlord to follow up on that if they won't give you some information that they have. We can follow up on that, but that's about as much as we can do in terms of the rental assistance part of it.
Can either of you address the issue of what are housing stabilization services vis-a-vis the rent relief program?
Housing stabilization is COVID rent relief gives you up to like $12,000. Rent stabilization is like maybe you only owe a month's rent or two, and your landlord is threatening to evict you, and it's not COVID related. You just are behind for whatever the reason. Rent stabilization will help you pay that. And that goes a little faster than getting in the COVID rent relief queue. But if you owe like a lot of money, rent stabilization can't help you. If you only owe a month or two, rent stabilization can probably put together something to help you get back on track. But if you owe months and months, you have to go through the rent relief program.
So what folks need to know is that if you don't qualify for the COVID rent relief program, which requires that your income was impacted because of the pandemic, your company laid you off, if you worked in retail or in hotels or someplace, some industry that was significantly or partially impacted, or you got sick from COVID, or you're the person who earns the rent in the household was sick from COVID and couldn't work. Those are the eligibility requirements for the COVID rent relief program, which are listed on the website. If I missed something or you'd like more questions answered, go to the link that we put in the chat and look at the eligibility requirements. And if you're not sure, apply anyway. All they can do is say no. But the county has an interest, as we all do, in seeing that people's housing remains stable, that not just because of the pandemic, but in general. We know how painful and disastrous it can be for someone to be evicted, especially if it's a temporary problem financially in your household. There are programs that have been set up and resources set up to provide homeless prevention and to assist you, as Ms. Rosie McCray Moody just said. So when in doubt, call 311 and tell them your situation, and they can help. If you are facing imminent eviction and the COVID rent relief program can't help you, and what they're offering is not going to stop the eviction, there are services that could offer storage money for putting your belongings in storage, putting you in a temporary hotel, and other counseling services to get you through a difficult time. We say over and over and over again, please don't wait. If you have a court date, go to court. If you think you're going to be facing trouble down the road, don't wait till it gets worse, till you get to court, till you get a sheriff's notice. If you think you're in difficult times, let us give you some information. Let us counsel you. Let us consider your options before things get worse. The Renters Alliance is here to help. The Housing AHIP is here to help. Housing Initiative Project, I think that's what it is. The Aladdin Economic Development Corporation, LEDC, CASA, the Renters Alliance. We're all here with resources to guide you, provide you with information. And of course, the county is here to do the same thing. So, please don't wait. And if you know somebody who's in trouble, please guide them to us and to these resources. Are there any more questions? I don't know if we see anything else in the chat or online here. Let me just go through and make sure we haven't missed anybody.
Matt, there's just one question I had about if a doctor writes you a note that your your respiratory health has been negatively affected by mold, does that constitute reason enough for a landlord or for a code to go in and write a violation?
I don't think so, Rosie.
It's not code. Code can go in and see if there's mold in there and order that the mold be repaired, be eliminated. They tell you to investigate the source and eliminate it. Now, if you saying that mold is making you sick and you want to get out of your lease, then call landlord tenant.
You're on mute, Rosie, again.
Yeah.
Okay. Just having mold in and of itself, even if you have a doctor's note, code will go out and tell them to fix the mold and eliminate the source of it. But they won't automatically write a citation or anything like that. Because as I've said before, there are no mold standards. Now, and as I also said, some people are particularly sensitive to mold. So call landlord tenant, we'll talk to you, we'll talk to the landlord and see what we can do. Maybe you need to go to a different unit. Maybe you need to move and be released from your lease without penalty. That's a landlord tenant issue, not code enforcement. Code enforcement can only make them investigate and correct the source of the mold and eliminate it.
And a violation, and the violation standard is visible mold. There are other sensitivities out there that landlords can't be responsible for the health issues of every tenant. But as Rosie was just mentioning, there are reasons to break a lease that are justifiable. Maybe Rosie, you can briefly go through some of the reasons that allow a person to break a lease and what a break lease looks like.
You can leave for a circumstance beyond your control if you have the death of a major wage earner. If you're married and your significant other somehow becomes disabled, something happens, he may have a heart attack or whatever, and now he's sick. You can break your lease for that. You might, your job may transfer you to New York, more than 50 miles away, and you either go or you have no job, or you're married and you're in the service, you get orders. All of these are circumstances beyond your control. I can't enumerate all of them, but if you have a circumstance beyond your control, give your landlord a 30-day notice that you have to leave because whatever. And whatever documentation you have for that, attach it. Because you may say, you can't just write the man a note and say, I'm leaving because you never fix anything. That won't fly. And we've had that. People have said that.
And you may,
So
and
you have to have a
may be
reason.
justified.
But you have to be able to, even if you say you fixing because he leaving because he won't fix anything, you have to show that you've called code enforcement and they've been out there 4 or 5 times or whatever, and nothing's been done. You have to have a reason. You can't just give a 30-day notice and break your lease.
That's right. And imagine this is a contract, and if you owe 6 months more of rent on your contract, that landlord is not going to let you go unless you can substantiate your reason. So that's very important. It's something beyond your control. If you decide you're going to buy a house, that's not beyond your control.
That's the reason within your
If you
control.
decide you're going to have a better apartment, that's not beyond your control. If you decide to get married and move in with your boyfriend or girlfriend, that's not beyond your control. So remember the difference is, as Rosie enumerated, these are issues beyond your control, but you would only be responsible for, Rosie, 30 days.
You'd be responsible for the notice period and up to 1 more month's rent or actual damages, whichever is less. So once you tell the landlord, I have to leave because whatever, he has to mitigate his damages. So he has to put it up for rent. He has to try to find a new renter. If it's a house and you know somebody who wants to rent, by all means, send that person in. So say he's a good landlord, puts it up, and he gets a tenant right away. So you leave on the 15th and the new person moves in on the 1st. The most he could charge you is that half a month's rent.
Right.
But even if he doesn't get anybody till 2 months later, the most he could charge you is 1 more month's rent.
All right, we just have a couple more minutes. We have one more question that comes in all the time, and something that bothers me like crazy, and Rosie and I have talked about it a number of times. What is the responsibility in the law of a landlord to keep an accurate ledger?
He's required by law to keep an accurate ledger. That's state law. He's supposed to be able to keep a ledger, and I think he has to keep it for up to 2 years. I have to check that. So
if I'm a renter and I go in and I say, you know what, I don't understand why I'm being charged this, or this doesn't seem to be the same as whatever, is the tenant entitled to go in and say, I'd like to see the ledger? And if it's not accurate, what do you do?
If you ask for your ledger and you don't agree with what's in it, call the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. We'll review it. And on the tenant side, keep your receipts. Keep a record of what you paid. Because when you come in and say, well, this isn't right, I paid $1,000 on the 15th of August. Well, if you can't prove you paid the $1,000 on the 15th of August and he didn't write it down, it's like it never happened. You have to be able to prove what you say. So you keep receipts too. Be sure to keep everything documented.
This relates to somebody who might have received or is going to receive rent relief from the county, but that's rent. And so it's going to go on your ledger one way or the other, and it has to be put there. It's covering rent for a certain period of time, and that needs to be made accurate on your ledger. So, folks, we're always here to help. It's not just Renter Town Halls only. If you have questions or concerns that were not addressed in this town hall, please email us at info@rentersalliance.org. Very simple information, info@rentersalliance.org. I put it in the chat. You can also call 311 and ask to speak to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs or the Office of Code Enforcement. You can also call 311 and ask for the rent relief program and get information from the Health and Human Services Department. We put all this information in the chat. This Renter Town Hall has been recorded and is on YouTube if you want to go back and take a look at some of the questions and answers. And we will have another Renter Town Hall on October 15th, I believe. And if you've been in this Renter Town Hall, you'll be in our database. You'll receive information and updates on upcoming events and activities. As Deputy Director Frank Desmarais said, please share this information as widely as you can. If you see somebody in need, connect them to us, to these resources. We're all in a community here. The Renters Alliance slogan is building community, so we have to act like a community. So I want to thank Rosie McCray Moody, the Manager of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. I want to acknowledge my fellow board member and Vice Chair of our board, Chris Perry, who's been listening in, making sure we're doing the right thing, and the Deputy Director of Housing, Mr. Frank Desmarais. Frank, any last words?
Just again, a thank you to Renters Alliance. This is very helpful to hear, what the questions are. We're going to keep working to try and get this information clearer, and we understand we need to do it faster. So we appreciate your feedback. And again, as Matt just said, and we keep saying, please help us share ideas. Contact us if you believe there's a better way to get word out. We're available on the emails that you saw on there for the ULTA intake and for other ways of contacting us. We look forward to working with you.
All right. And with that, thank you all and good night.